Wiz Khalifa has a lot of hits that are used in sync all the time, right?
Yeah.
So like Black and Yellow has been used on like 18 different huge either
I can't
trailer
even
campaigns.
I cannot imagine how much that song is worth. All right, today's episode is a good one. I'm talking with two of my best friends in the sync world, XJ Will and Deraj. We're diving into the Grammys, why most artists don't even think about joining, and how easy it actually is to be a Grammy voting member, and whether it's worth it. Then we get into sync licensing and branding, how artists like Wiz Khalifa, Doja Cat, and even Creed, yes, Creed, have used sync to blow up their careers. Plus, the reality of music industry deals, what labels don't tell you, why artists keep signing really, really bad contracts, and what you should be doing instead. If you're an artist, producer, or just curious about how music actually makes money, you're gonna love this one. So stick around, enjoy some coffee, whatever you're drinking, and we're gonna have a good time. I'll see you in there. All right, totals.
I got some ideas. So
Grammys, which I didn't watch.
Yeah, we definitely, I definitely feel we should talk about the Grammys.
Right?
That's something like I never really had an interest to do, but like after realizing how easy the process is to like become a member or whatever, I'm like, it's not really that hard. Might as well just do it for kicks. And then like high key, if you just find a genre that doesn't have much attention, it's just the easy win.
Right.
You know what I mean? So interesting.
I've been wanting to do the Grammy U stuff, like I guess as an education, somehow being within their ecosystem. But admittedly, I'm still very ignorant to the process of all, because I've had a few people say like, "Oh, I can recommend you to da da da," but I feel like it's always these extra steps that you kind of have to. I think you have to get like 2 people to vote you in, and then it's all of this. I think it's only a certain window when you can do it, and a bunch of other things. It hasn't really been a priority of mine. It's been like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get to it when I get to it, kind of thing. But I'm like, let me just focus on what I got going on right now, and we can pick that up a little later. But that probably should be a thing that I prioritize this year. Now that I done relaunched the community and everything, it'd be a good addition for those who are coming in. So they're like, oh, he's Grammy U mentor, and then also on the other side, if there's folk in the Grammy U ecosystem that just need to learn more about sync from an artist perspective, got you. So
big facts, because you think about like how music is built for sync, like it has very, very strong correlations to what a hit really is. Like I got something on my Instagram that's going viral at the moment, and it's just structure. And it's Wiz Khalifa talk, and high key Wiz Khalifa has a lot of like hits that you are used in sync all the time, right?
Yeah.
So like Black and Yellow has been used on like 18 different huge either trailer campaigns.
I cannot imagine how much that song is worth.
Oh,
like
goodness.
Just think of what was that, like early 2010s or something. It was like on every single movie.
And that was right when Steelers was going to Super Bowl or doing some playoff stuff. So like I was watching the interview, and he was mentioning like that was that's how he knew that actually put him on when they started using it for like the stadiums and stuff like that. And so it's just like, there it is again. You know what I'm saying?
I didn't realize that. That's another. I wonder where he was at his career before that popped off, and how much that kind of put him into another conversation because of that, utility, I guess.
I mean, if you think about like Steelers fans or whatever, it's like how many of them, just like the average Steeler fan, like everybody's like dad is like a Steeler fan or whatever. It's just like how many dudes in Pennsylvania were just like listening to Wiz Khalifa. And then it's the interesting thing about sync is it's B2B. So it's a business deal, but it's like all of their customers are now going to listen to it. So you get paid for that actual deal, but then their customers, all their listeners, it just like compounds. So I wonder what actually that did for his fan base. Interestingly, I haven't actually looked it up, but I would imagine that I'm
gonna have to do some more research on that interview, because I saw it and I was just like, that makes so much sense. Because like when you think, if you're not like a hardcore Wiz fan, like that's the first song I think of. You know what I'm saying? There might be a couple others, like the one he did that was like on the soundtrack of Fast and Furious, but like those are his go-tos.
Yeah, to be honest, like I'm not a historian on Wiz stuff. I couldn't tell you like a ton of his
blasphemy, Deraj.
Right, yeah, because I just know the See You Again, the Young, Wild and Free, and then the Black and Yellow. I think those are the songs that I know when I think Wiz catalog. But I think he's gotten to that point where his celebrity and his name is just, who may not be familiar. People might be more familiar with him as a person within the space, like as a personality, than maybe for his music, maybe, but not as hip. So somebody could, cancel me for saying something like that. But I was never super hip to all of his catalog. I just knew Wiz Khalifa because he was Wiz Khalifa, and his persona just preceded him in my eyes. But I mean, he runs it up on streaming, and he got 34 streams right now, and he's been on a ton of soundtracks as well, which I got Suicide Squad here, Fast and Furious. Y'all keep talking. I'm gonna keep looking to see what else he was on.
No, Wiz is interesting because I felt like he was getting a lot of, like Black and Yellow, a bunch of other tracks were getting synced a lot, and then you see this situation happen with a lot of artists as soon as they start seeing like a lot of commercial success, and like they've really drilled into their fan base. It's like, how can we scale into other, at least like how labels are working. It's like, how can we scale into like other avenues? So did that track with Bruno, did that track with Charlie Puth,
all right, so others. Hold up. So we got Fast Six, we got Iron Fist, we got Uncle Drew. He was on Uncle Drew, and then I guess the high school movie that was the single that him and Bruno and Snoop did, Fast Furious 7. I think that's all. Suicide Squad, I already mentioned that. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely leveraged sync in a couple different ways.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like that's, and I like what you mentioned about branding, because I think especially nowadays, because sync has become a little bit more popular, branding is going to be so important moving forward 2025, 2026, because if you can't actually stand out from a different artist or a different producer, like it doesn't, it's not going to feel as authentic as it could be, and B, it's not going to help tell the story. So it's extremely important, because like sometimes when you see those bigger deals, it's for an artist that has not necessarily a following, but like has a brand that stands on something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
like, they'll pay that extra $1 for that.
I think I didn't realize that was helping me, I think, early on when I came into the space, because I had already built up a fan base, built up a following, and decided to just go full-fledged, full force into. And even though I took time to understand like what it takes to actually have music that fits in this space and can get licensed more consistently, I also had a fully fleshed, my website or whatever. Is just like, oh, this he actually is an artist.
Yeah.
He's an artist, and so that's one of those things too. Even now, when I'm talking artists getting into the space, how do you actually either your existing artist brand or curate that brand experience for other brands to kind of buy more into kind of your story, because that's what all brands are trying to license artists. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, like they're chasing the premier sounds and whatever the taste, like whatever tastemakers are kind of putting forward is like, this is just what's it. You know what I mean? And even one of the things that I'm encouraging my students to do now is like just studying just what is going viral, like what's on the Spotify top 50 viral list, and listening to that just to get some insights of just where the trends are, where music is, just to be aware of it. But also it's like, I don't know, just the more that you can stand out, I think the better it is overall for you, even though you don't necessarily need it. But I do think it's use everything at your disposal. You know what I mean?
You know, something that we use in our community that's like a cheat code if you're a producer, and it works for artists too. Not Spotify, Splice has started like a year ago, started releasing what gets downloaded the most often. And it's a huge way to like actually find out what's going to trend for the next year. Cause it's like, if everyone's downloading these types of sounds, then you can easily make sure that your music sounds current very quickly, because it's just like, there's data right there. And so like doing that, and then Luminate always has their thing that they release every year. That's been super helpful, especially in January, February. That's normally when I like plot out what music I'm going to make for the year, so that like I'll know it'll be on trend. It's just a matter of just making sure it sounds as authentic as possible.
So something that I would do like a lot, this was like years ago when I was like really getting to more label work. You're just making a bunch of demos, and obviously like translated like a lot into sync, but if you look at charts, like anything that's charting on Billboard or just like whatever, or like heat seekers or whatever, you go on the very, very bottom, like the bottom 10 tracks that are just on there for like their first week. You have an idea of like, all right, the next, because they're just going to rise, you know, a lot of them
Next
at
wave.
least. So it's like, all right, this is probably what we're going to start expecting. So yeah, similar. Okay, that's pretty cool that Splice is doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Because again, if I want to say, I would be really curious to see how, like, what is the percentage of music creators nowadays that use Splice? Like, it's got to be somewhere around like 70. It has to be, because it's too big of a platform to not use it. And now it's been integrated in DAWs.
I don't know any collaborators that I work with that don't use Splice, to be honest. No,
I'm saying, about it, like,
I don't think, I think about just about everybody I work with. I don't know any producer I work with that do not use Splice. It's a good statistic.
Going back to what we were talking about with brands, though, like, I would love your guys' opinion on this. Like, everybody wants to get as many deals as possible, but the way that I've always looked at sync, it's almost like dating. Like, you're gonna have a type, and I feel like brands specifically need a brand match, and they're willing to pay a premium for a brand match, because if you have the same kind of following that would likely be into whatever they're doing, they're willing to pay a premium for that, because they just get like cheaper customers. Essentially, you also act as like a marketing tool.
Oh yeah, remember that stint that Snoop did where he was talking about giving up smoking, and it was like, what, a week or a month later, he's like, no, I'm giving up smoking on this. I'm using this brand. Like, it works. And that was a year ago, and I still remember it. So, like, good marketing.
That
kind of stuff.
Campaign.
Yeah, you just gotta kind of figure out what and I think it's easier for artists, because it's just like, we normally attract people that we are kind of like anyway. You know what I'm saying? So that ideal customer comes fairly quickly, in my opinion. You can look at how, like, Charlie XCX did her thing with her brand this year with Brat. Like, that stuff goes. So it's like the blueprint's there, so to speak, as far as with artist branding. It's just a matter of like, how do you make sure that you not only just come off as professional as possible, because especially in sync, like, you kind of need to make sure you look like you got your business together, but also making sure everything's cohesive with like who you are as a person. Because I know a lot of influencers that end up burning out just because, like, they're putting on a facade of who they actually are. So it takes a lot of more energy than just like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Like, for instance, with me, like, I just want my music in the Spider-Verse. That's it. Like, it's super simple. It's easy for people to follow. And even if I fail, like, I still have that brand, because it's like, hey, you're the guy. Because I've gone to like conferences and stuff, and they're like, Spider-Verse all the time. So it works. It's just a matter of just being who you are. Or Gary Vee, he wants to own the Jets. Like, that's part of his brand.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, just because it happens a lot, where talking to Music Bed and their team, and they have clients that love to come back to certain artists because they just work so well with creative, you know what I mean? And so it's good to have that data when you can get it. And if you start noticing those trends of like, hey, either this brand or these types of brands seem to, really resonate with either what I do naturally or what's in my my skill set to be able to pull off authentically, you know what I mean? Because I'm probably a prime example of that, where I'm an artist that loves to create different sounds, and I've partitioned myself in such a way where I have all these different artist projects that are doing different, but they're all kind of
has so many different pseudonyms.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
And they're all new. If they can have the self-awareness to know where their music sits, and then the research chops to know who needs stuff like this and how to just double down on that. To what you were saying, Josh, I do think it could be a really good marriage of like, this brand just knows this artist, and most often they have music that just aligns with it. And then, if it works, then you can start scaling out to similar, you know what I mean? Or like a similar, kind of vibe. And now you got a whole little ecosystem of some rounds that you can do. And that's why, I think all of this stuff weighs in. And I think there's some really great strategies with positioning your brand in such a way that it courts the type of opportunities you want. But I always say it, like all of this stuff kind of boils down to is just like the research of like who you are and where you think your music has market value, and then just continuing to get good at that.
All right, quick break in the pod to tell you about That Pitch. If you are an artist trying to land sync placements, you can stop wasting your time cold emailing music supervisors. To be honest, it's awkward for all of us. Here's the facts. 99% of sync deals happen through music libraries, and that's exactly where That Pitch puts your music. No pitching, no chasing, no endless revisions. You upload your tracks, we distribute them into over 100 of the world's top sync libraries automatically. Libraries handle the placements, you keep 100% of your sync fees and royalties. That Pitch is for artists who want to get their music placed, not spend years grinding for a maybe. Whether you're new to sync or tired of the old way, this is how it actually happens. Join for free at thatpitch.com, links in the description. And by the way, if you don't like the idea, that's fine too. Here's my dog. His name's Gus. Look at him. Look at him, he's adorable. Gus, say hi, buddy. Gus, come on, bud. Be friendly. That's Gus. All right, back to the pod. See you later.
Like, that's why I love just listening to what's out there so much, because I can get a better sense of like I did this case study on Wingstop for like a webinar series that I was doing.
I just love that concept. I did a case study on Wingstop.
I did a case study on Wingstop because I was like, I was watching. That's dope. I was watching football on Prime or whatever, and I kept seeing Wingstop commercials come up in a few different flavors of it. No pun intended, but it was a couple of different flavors of commercials where they had this one where it was like a family setting, and this dad and his kids were playing. There was another one where these friends were doing a gathering, and they're ringing the doorbell, and they come in, Wingstop, and it's another one where they're in a car and they're like doing donuts and all this other kind of stuff. And all of them had the same like look and feel. All of them, were featuring, they had some through lines where it was predominantly featuring like a millennial kind of Gen Z, demo. And then on top of that, the music that they were using was all like hip hop, kind of mid to major artists. Like it was one of the Baby was one of them. They had a P-Lo song. They used Ray Shrimmer for a song. Then also I noticed
he's a sleeper,
right? And then I noticed that the cast that they chose, not only their age demographic, but it was majority minority, if you will. So a lot of black and brown folk. And so like all these little indicators of like, all right, man, like this is how, if you really start to take a minute to like dive into the decisions that they're making and the repetition, across the whole campaign, is like they're telling me what it is that is of value to them, not only based about the music, but it's supported by some of the decisions that they're making with the creative. And so now it just becomes like more data points for me in my research to say like, I can qualify to say, does what I do kind of fit more near to what this type of brand wants if my goal is to get, foot in the door with a Wingstop. And so it's just, but I keep drilling down. It's just the research component. You know what I mean? It's like I can infer all of those things just because of watching TV and just paying attention specifically. So
that's crazy because like at the end of the day, it's like, does my audience match your audience?
What it all comes down to.
Right. Yeah.
Like there's so many. It's pretty easy to reverse engineer like what your audience is going to be and people who identify with you. And then you can just find products or services that are in that same audience pool. And then it's just a matter of, all right, I'm just going to reach out to these brands. I think a lot of people also mistake the concept that you can't work directly with companies. I've had a great experience working directly with brands, not even working with a supervisor. Obviously, I've done a bunch of supervision, but so I guess it makes me a supervisor in these particular situations. But like you can make connections directly with their head of creative, their head of marketing, or what have you. Like it's just a matter of, is there a match and does it bring value to that brand? That's ultimately what they're working for. And there's literally millions of these individual brands or buyers that could be applicable for. I think people forget like how big the world is and how many companies and businesses and creators there are. Like,
oh yeah,
it's wild.
Yeah.
Case studies. Oh, let me ask you guys actually, because we're talking about branding now. Like, what is who would be a good example of good branding in 2025 as far as like artists are concerned that could get deals? Because if you notice, like a lot of the major label artists, like and most people understand this, but like let's really talk about it. Like they don't make their money from streaming; they make their money from brand deals after they have a hit. Like
Yeah.
Rihanna's a perfect example in my opinion. I've seen her on like 18 different commercials for like skincare product. Well, I mean, she has her own brand with that stuff, but like she also collaborates with like fragrance brands and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, who do you think is going to end up doing that in 2025? Kind of like how Post Malone did the whole Bud Light situation. Doechii, I think she's got some potential for sure. But where would she land?
Can you pull that up?
The reason why I said Doechii is because music, they did an interesting carousel of her social media strategy, and she just kind of took some time to really like just kind of reposition herself and let her authentic voice. And also she's, I guess, the third woman to actually win in this category of like best hip hop album. So I forget the actual category she won, but she was I think it was Lauryn Hill, Cardi B, and Doechii was the only female hip hop artist to win the award she won. But that's, for in one sense, this is going to give her a lot more notoriety, and brand deals, are going to be jumping at the bit to try to collaborate with her in some sense. So that's why I say she's just positioned to do that. So I would probably bet that we'll see certain things ramp up. And also she's cut from the Kendrick cloth where it's just very like, she's more than just an artist. I just feel like, I feel like we haven't really seen where the touch points of her brand can really go.
She's
And
unapologetic herself too, which I think is like,
man, and so she reminds me of like kind of in the same space of like a Missy or Tierra Whack, you know what I mean? Like they just have their own, and it's unlike anything that you're seeing out there because she can run the lane. And I think that's why too, like Doja Cat kind of does something similar where her brand is so nuanced and she's such a chameleon, and it's just so distinct from all of the other, predominant like other female like hip hop artists in the space, where you do feel like there's a lot of, you know what I mean? But that's just music in general. Like, if something's working, you're just going to get a lot of people doing it because that's what it's the demand. But where I think it is really special is those who kind of can really cut through and can elevate what people are used to. And that's what I feel like, Doechii has done, because she can do the, the top 40 type vibe that just feels like what you would expect from somebody entering into the space. But she also, is posing in her cover art with a albino alligator, you know what I mean? Right. And doing hip hop, you know what I mean? And just cause she can sing, she can rap, she can like, but also on the, like creatively her aesthetic, you know what I mean? Is just like that. And that's why I think branding is such a good conversation as well, because it touches on the visual identity side of it, but it also is touching on her tone of voice, you know what I mean? And how she shows up. Yeah. And that's why I think like the Cardis, the Dojas, and the Doechiis, like for me, just have such a personality as well. You know what I mean? Like, Cardi just feels very much like, girl from the block that you just knew growing up, and she's just still there, but she hella famous, you know what I mean? And then kind of feels a little bit like just not a perfect example, but almost like, it's like those like black chicks that like anime, you know what I mean? Like they just kind of a little weird left, but they also know
they do their own thing. They beat to their own drum.
Yeah, they just like they rock what they rock with, but they're in tune with like a broader culture versus just what you would expect for them. And then Doechii kind of reminds me of that a little bit as well, where she just is very expressive with her, her art, you know what I mean? Her music, I don't know, she's just unashamed to just like do a track that is very traditional, current R&B kind of vibes. And then I'll give you a hip hop track, and then I give you a track like Crazy, which is synced a bunch of times, you know what I mean? And so it's like, you can't pin her down, you know what I mean? And that's, and now the fact that she has a Grammy to kind of show for it, I just feel like you probably can't tell her nothing at this point. Yeah. So yeah, man.
I think Doechii probably has the largest runway, so to speak.
Yeah.
Charlie, because she's been around for quite some time, like it might be a little bit harder to have that same momentum as she does at the moment. Yeah.
Who's Charlie? My bad.
Charlie,
yeah, my bad. Yeah, I'm following. Yep.
But what I was going to say was Chappelle, just because like, Chapel, sorry. Her her branding, like you already.
I like Chap. I like Chappelle.
I like
He's
Chappelle,
great
man.
too, man. I like him.
I'm like, he was up for a Grammy.
Let's not
for,
let
like,
Josh just work that off. That was a mistake.
You should have
man.
You should have let me keep going and just be like,
don't walk that off, Josh. That was
not gonna walk by that. Like, you just ain't called Chaperone Chappelle, like,
right. But like her branding, especially because she's from Missouri, like I think that it's so different from what you normally see as far as with mainstream artists that like I think she's got some room to move really quickly as well. Cause like I was doing a piece on her for content, and I had never seen Lollapalooza that packed in a long time for what she was doing. You know what I'm saying? And just because of
they do that in Chicago, right? Is that
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like Millennium Park was packed, bro. I was just like, this is crazy. And I think that kind of attention garnered is not something that should be shied away from. I don't think she does a lot of brand deals as of yet because she's also has an indie vibe and stuff. But like that, I mean, and then the stunt she pulled on at the Grammys, like
I want to talk about that. But go ahead, keep talking.
No, it's just like I think that because of that kind of attention, you can use it as momentum for sure. Like if I was going to the Grammys, like I would already have another album in the cut just waiting for when I do something like that. I'm gonna pull a Kanye moment.
Nah,
and
that's a
drop it.
It's a Will Smith moment. Don't talk about my wife. Anyways, before we, because I know we want to hit the Chaperone, we want to talk about Grammys. I want to just add one group to this, and I think it's gonna be hilarious that I bring this up. You know who I think actually has like a lot of appeal for brands right now, and I think is going to do phenomenally well in 2025, probably next few years? Creed. I think Creed is about to slay. Okay, so this is my thesis. Okay,
explain.
Right? So 2024. So I know the team who worked on the Paramount Plus ad, and Creed was chosen. The "Can You Take Me High?" That one.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why is because originally Paramount Plus actually wanted Foo Fighters, but it was just way too expensive, super over budget. Creed was going to start going on tour again. The music supervisor, he had just a random idea. Hey, what about Creed? Like they're about to go on tour. You know, they're not as relevant as they were, so we probably have some negotiating. And so they ended up going with Creed, and it was a huge success for that ad. But here's the thing is Creed has gotten to this interesting point where they're not necessarily like a legacy act. They're not that old, but they have a lot of nostalgia for 40s or so plus. But Gen Z is like obsessed with like rock. They're all bringing it back. So I think what we're going to see is similar to what we were seeing with Norah Jones like 10 years ago. 5 years ago, she was in like a lot of her records were in a bunch of ads, but they had a different master on it. So they would do covers in a different style. Nora's stuff. I think Vogue did that move. And it kind of hit two generations at once. So I think between the nostalgia, Gen Z loving it as well, negotiating, there's kind of like some joke there. And it seems like they're just really easy to work with. I honestly think they're going to slay in 2025. I could be wrong, but that's my thesis.
I think you might be right about that, bro. Because like, if you think about how
I told you, bro, I was waiting for last.
Well,
you would check
this out. The resurgence of decades seems to be on a cycle. Because like, don't get me wrong, I think 2017 to about 2022, the 80s. And I think also because like whoever was supervising, like that's what they grew up with. So the nostalgia's there. So it's easier to clear because it's like, this is what we're doing because this is what we're making. So I think that there's like a 10, 15 year resurgence that can easily happen with sync. That's like a slipstream into like the mainstream, so to speak, again, just because it's like, okay, this is what I grew up with. Because most people, they acquire their taste of music around that preteen years, right? And then another decade goes by. Now they're like adults, and they're making decisions for stuff.
Positions of power. That's really interesting. It's a 20-year. I
don't know, man. Like that might be a thing, but
2%
I think that
that was at least I named the music artist. My God, Grammys.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say to that point, I feel like that's it just ends up being, I think, the cycle regardless, because at every 5 years, decade, whatever, there's always this reintroduction of, it's like when they came out with the Power Rangers movie. You know what I mean? It's like we're trying to tap back into like what Mark was saying, that the nostalgia, but also kind of catering to two different demos at the same time if we can. You know what I mean? Like it's the best of both worlds. But
nostalgia
I
sells.
agree. Yeah. So Grammys. And it's funny because and maybe I'll probably get flamed for this, but I wasn't even aware who Chappell Roan was until this whole like moment at the Grammys.
Oh, you want to know what's hilarious? One of my best friends just started a Chappell Roan cover band. We saw them packed out, dude. I almost,
wow.
He hit me up months ago to see if I would play drums for this band.
That's
I was like,
funny.
dude, I haven't played live in a bit. I just don't want a cover band to be my venue or coming back.
I was watching her live, or I actually need to finish it because the day of the Grammys, I was busy and I couldn't check it out. But I did catch maybe like the first 30 or so minutes of it and saw her perform. And I was just like, I like what she's doing and kind of how she's positioned. Like I could see, why she probably is, for consideration for Grammys and all that kind of stuff. But her comment was interesting as far as
saw that.
Her at her acceptance speech, because she was positioned in such a way where she was wanting to see labels kind of step up a bit more to provide a livable wage and insurance and benefits and all this other kind of stuff, which I was like, in one sense I think it makes sense, because I think the industry as a whole, just trying to figure out a way to help the independent artists in a way that's a little bit more equitable, or just like equitable, just like some years back, these just straight profit allow the only to listen to them streaming, and it's just fractions of a penny make something
13% than last.
You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think the sentiment of it is really strong, but the angle of the responsibility being on labels to provide like insurance and a livable wage and all that kind of was, I kind of paused for a minute, and maybe too, it might be ignorance of just how mainstream, like more major label deal structures look like nowadays, or just what the expectation is. Because I've always held the philosophy of like, as an artist, I'm a business partnering with another business, which is a label. I'm not an employee of the label. And so like the insurance, when I hear insurance talk, when I hear, livable wage and all this other kind of stuff, I'm thinking as if I'm being hired by the label versus I'm partnering, with the label on this type of venture, like this kind of JV thing. And so that was only there. I wanted some conversation about that, because maybe I'm just looking at it wrong, but in my mind, I was just like, I don't know if that's the right target if we're looking to get, it almost feels like it might be more of a union situation to, but even unions like can function differently and, have different, anyway. But what are you guys' thoughts on that? Because I was just really curious to know like how people felt with that kind of perspective of like, is a label supposed to, give insurance and benefits and a livable wage, or are you just supposed to negotiate that in the deal, you know what I mean, before you jump in?
I think that, no, I mean, all I was going to say was that I think that when it comes to that was the reason why I actually got to sync. Was I was 26 and I was like, yo, I'm about to get off my parents' health insurance and these gigs ain't cutting it. So I'm gonna have to figure out something else. The problem, I think, is that that's not label's business model. So it's hard to kind of even do something like that. You know what I'm saying? Because they're already, and granted, they make a lot of money. Let's be real. Like they make a lot of money. And I'm sure if they downsized the amount of artists they try to pick up to try to see which one catches fire, you could possibly make a business model like that where like, hey, we're going to give you a salary. We need X amount of songs. You know what I'm saying? Like it can be done.
Right.
But they don't, labels don't work like that because they're trying to find people, again, that already have followings and stuff, because it's easier to predict, okay, this person's going to blow up because they already have their stuff together. Right. So like, I understand where she's coming from, but at the same time, like if it's not put in the deal, like there's nothing you can really do about it other than like try to reform and try to fix stuff that way. But nowadays, I don't think that's something that they're really interested in, because you see how they're all moving towards distribution now anyways. Like, unless we find a way to actually get out of the streaming model, like that stuff's not going to change. There's not enough money for it.
What do you think, Mark? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's at least my experience, because as I've developed or worked on records with artists, there's some people who never land a deal. There's some people who land their first deal. There's some people who land their last deal, and there's like a lot of people in the middle. It's really interesting. The unfortunate thing about labels, publishers, any sort of deal is people do not accept these deals based off of economics 99% of the time. They accept them based off of insecurities. So, what a majority of the time a label or a publisher deal, like a deal does for somebody, is I'm a big deal now. That's what it's doing for the artist, unfortunately.
Social
Because if
equity.
you read, it's social equity. They feel good about themselves. They've made it. There's a lot of like validation. And I
Yeah.
think everybody who enters music naturally enters for difficult reasons. I don't know any, you know. So the unfortunate these deals, um, early on, majority of the time, if they don't have any history in business or doing anything, and then as they grow, they realize the fine print is affecting their life,
Mhm.
and they likely could have negotiated earlier on. But it's like, how can you expect that from a 18-year-old who signs their first deal? You can't. You know, it's
Yeah.
difficult, and so that's kind of the hard part. It's like a lot of the stuff can be negotiated in. How much leverage do you got? Shop around. You know, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's why I was that's the feeling that I got, because it's almost like if I'm, if I'm just trying to hire a contractor, you know what I mean, for something, or not even, maybe contract is not the right word, you know what I mean? It's like if I'm, that's why I say partnership. Like I just look at it as a partnership. I'm bringing something to the table, you're bringing something to the table, and we're going to equally benefit off of this. And that's why it's like it's more of a revenue share model than it is, a
well,
hire model in a sense, you know what I mean? But the
yeah, but
question could be, go ahead.
that can be, you're like referring to a JV or like even a vanity
Yeah.
label, right? So for those listening, like a JV is like, hey, I got these resources, you guys got these resources. So it's like, hey, I have a publishing company, I have all these songwriters working with us, you know, blah blah blah. You're the label, you have all of these artists. Okay, we're gonna match, and then we're gonna share the profits, and then go through the distribution. So it's like
Mhm.
I don't have to build out all that stuff. They don't have to build out all this stuff.
Yeah,
We're
the
team
infrastructure.
up. Yeah, we're all going to make more money together. That's a joint venture, right?
Yeah.
Vanity label is something like Dreamville, J. Cole, or Billion Dollar Baby to Baby. So I've worked with these vanity labels, but the thing is, they're essentially just like a white label of the record label behind it. Billion Dollar Baby is a vanity label from Interscope. So it's basically like we're just dealing with the Interscope's team, right?
Mhm.
Billion Dollar Baby, there's not, I mean, there's certain people like working there, but they're really, in order to a
Yeah.
lot more stuff happen, you have to talk to the Interscope team. So
Yeah.
they're just utilizing their brand. That's it. But
I
all these
hope
different deals,
I hope
you got to be swift.
I would say I hope Chaperone does like a podcast interview or something to really
So we
unpack
Dive
know,
what
deeper.
she
yeah.
was
Yeah.
seeing. Yeah, unpack what she was seeing on her side and where she felt like, man, I just don't feel like I'm getting my fair shake. You know what I mean? And this was the expectation, and this is probably what should have gotten, or whatever that was. You know what I mean? Because it's in my mind, it still just boils down to like, there's a time when you're signing a deal where you're just all of the particulars right and fighting for what you feel
Yeah.
like your value is. And so that's why I feel like, if you sign a deal, you sign a deal, you know what I mean? And nobody, as far as I know, nobody coerced, you know what I mean, or forced somebody
But
to. Now, if they were uneducated and was, ignorant, or if there was some type of exploitation that was happening, then that's maybe a different conversation. But if she had proper representation and going into a deal, I'm just like, is
yeah.
it their responsibility now, if it's not in the contract, to give insurance benefits and a livable wage, if that's not what you guys negotiated on the front end?
Yeah. And the fact is, like, labels, it's two sides. Labels have smarter teams, more bigger teams. They've done
Yeah,
all the math. It is totally 1,000% built against you, like at least for majors. And if you're able to, like, you just absolutely kill it, you can sometimes work your way out of it. But the vast majority of the time,
yeah,
it's built against you. There's no mathematical equation where you can get out of the perpetual debt that is a major label deal. So there's that. There's the flip side of the coin where it's okay, if they do offer great benefits for everybody, what we're going to see is there's just going to be a lot less signings because it's going to be riskier for them to sign more people. If some guy is willing to,
I don't think it is a. Oh, go ahead, Josh. My bad.
yeah. It's like when you see unions form for like the steelworkers plant. It's everybody should be treated better, but the fact is they signed it and then they just left the town.
This
it sucks.
This could be my bad. Go ahead, Mark.
No, that's it. It sucks. I'm just stating like the whole situation's terrible.
Well, one of the other things that comes to mind is that if you know how the U.S. kind of has a regulatory system around how banks can lend money, they can't do like predatory, and so it's almost as if could labels be put under a certain type of scrutiny where it's just like, hey, you guys are creating situations that are either impossible or predatory to this artist in this position based on whatever evaluation you guys are putting against their catalog and what you're projecting to make. But I mean, I don't know the nuances of it, but that's just the only thing that's comparable is just like, how could you bring some regulation around what labels can or can't do that feel of the little guy? Because that's effectively what happened early on, and why banks are regulated the way they are, because it's like, you can't just, give somebody a mortgage and then expect them to be able to, pay and their income verification. Now you're foreclosing on them.
But that's why they call it an advance. That's why they call it an advance, not a loan. Yes. If it was a loan, then it's lending. This is an advance. And if it was an employee, then they could have rights again. This is all set up, guys. I've thought about this before.
Yeah. And because I found this other lending, I don't know what they are, brokers or whatever, but it's called Home Tap, if I'm not mistaken. But their business model is that you can basically get a loan against it's basically like a HELOC, but it's a little different because you don't have to pay anything back. Like, I think it's like a 10-year period or something like that. But, and I don't even know if it's interest on it, but I think what they do is it's a super long, repayment period. And I don't think there's any interest. I could be wrong with that, but they're also getting a certain stake, within your home, you know what I mean? So if you ever go to sell it, they're going to get like,
it's like collateral.
Yeah. And so I was just like, it kind of feels that's what the music industry is to a degree. Like, they're putting up advances, and depending on, the deal structure and stuff like that. And if it ever goes to sell, like, they're a part of the, the deal at the end of the day. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel like there could be some conversations around it to see what is it that is almost, let's really get down to what, like, where the labels are being the bad guy, the Lex Luthors or whatever of this equation, to say, like, all right, these things are what we're seeing labels do. And are there any ideas to help bring around it? And how much of this also puts, some responsibility on the artist to just not sign certain deals? You know what I mean? It's just like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's some responsibility on both sides. I will also say, like, for majors though, like, if you can learn so much about major labels by just like reading any of their financial reports or whatever, if they have them available, like Universal, like, just read their S1, like the executive package, the executive package, like the bonus package, is based off of market share. It's not based off of profitability or growth or whatever. It's all based off of market share. So years ago, what was really interesting, remember hip hop like started overtaking pop as like the number one genre, right? Yeah, mid 2010s, it was like really, okay, this is clearly going to be the top consumed genre. I don't know if you guys saw this, but like half of my friends that hip hop artists were just starting to get deals offered from Universal. Not great deals, like 40 grand sort of stuff. And like, that's it. And they were just lopping up all of these artists and just putting them on just shelving them. So it either didn't interfere with the primary artist that they were pushing, or so they could just have market share. And that was it. And then you saw the bonuses distributed. Wild. So you also have to understand like the incentives by majors, like in their entire business model is built off of these incentives. Again, just study how like the model works, and you can realize pretty quickly if that A&R who said he's going to help you is actually going to help you. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's everything. That's not just music.
Yeah. Own your audience.
Own it. And then own your catalog if you can. Like, just as much ownership as you have, the more power you have to leverage that ownership as much as you want.
Love it. A part to it. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Appreciate y'all fellas, man. This is dope.
Cool. All right. Yeah, man. All right. See you, bud.